On a damp and cold October night, the streets of Newport in Rhode Island were bathed in an incessant rain that left the asphalt glistening under the yellowish street lamps. Livia, a cab driver who was 7 months pregnant, was adjusting her rearview mirror and lightly massaging her belly, trying to relieve a discomfort that was intensifying with the long hours of work she spent sitting and driving around the city. Life had not been kind to Livia. Widowed at 32, she struggled daily to support her 2 young children after the unexpected death of her husband in an accident at work. That night, as she thought about returning home and resting, her eyes caught the drenched figure of an older, homeless man trying to take cover under the marquee of an abandoned building. Livia's maternal instinct spoke louder. She stopped the cab and lowered the window. "Do you need help?" she asked, looking at the man whose eyes held hundreds of untold stories. He hesitated, clearly surprised by the unexpected offer. I'm fine, young lady. Just trying to shelter from the rain," he said, in a hoarse voice that betrayed not only his cold, but also his malnutrition. "I can take you to a shelter or hospital if you need me. It's not safe to stay out here in this rain and cold," insisted Livia, moved by a combination of compassion and concern. "Hospital? Maybe I really should go. I haven't felt well for days," he confessed, accepting the help with a mixture of relief and shame. Livia got out of the car to help him. He supported himself with difficulty, looking weaker than his height would suggest. With every step he took, Livia felt the weight of her own worries, but also the determination to make a difference at least that night. On the way to the hospital, the man, who introduced himself as Raoul, told her fragments of his life. He spoke of his days as a laborer, how the economic crisis and a series of misfortunes led him to the streets after losing his job and his family. Arriving at the hospital, Livia accompanied Raoul to the emergency entrance, making sure he received care before finally considering her own need for rest. Leaving him in the capable hands of the doctors, she returned to her cab, her thoughts revolving not only around her night, but also about how she would teach her children to look out for others, just as her mother had taught her, even in the midst of hardship. The next morning, when the sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, spreading a warm glow over the still damp streets of Newport, despite the restless night, after breakfasting her children and taking them to school, Livia was back behind the wheel of her cab, driven by the need to provide for her family. As she drove, her thoughts wandered to her meeting with Raoul. She wondered how he was doing, hoping that the hospital could offer not only medical treatment, but perhaps a way for him to recover something of his former life. In front of her cab, after a short prayer, she was lost in thought when a luxury car, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, pulled up next to her modest cab. The contrast between the two vehicles was remarkable, highlighting the inequalities so common in the city. Livia barely had time to register the car when the passenger window rolled down, revealing a well-dressed, middle-aged man who seemed to analyze her with peculiar interest. "Good morning. Are you the cab driver who took a man to hospital last night?" he asked, his voice carrying a tone of urgency mixed with curiosity. Livia, somewhat surprised by the approach, nodded cautiously. "Yes, I am. He needed help. Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. In fact, I want to thank you. That man was my brother. I looked for him for years and only found out about him through the hospital records this morning. Thanks to you, I finally found him," explained the man with relief visible in his eyes. "Oh, I'm relieved to have helped. How is he?" Livia asked, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Weak, but he'll be fine. He told me how you helped him." "Few would have done what you did," the man replied, looking at her with a mixture of appraisal and respect. "It was nothing. Anyone would have done the same," said Livia, although she knew that not everyone would stop to help a stranger. "No, not everyone," he insisted. "My name is Edward, and I'd like to do something for you in return. Please allow me to help you in some way." Edward's offer took Livia by surprise. She was used to managing on her own, reluctant to accept help, but something in Edward's sincerity and the thought of her children made her reconsider. She hesitated, looking down at her own belly, thinking of her children at home, of how life could be a little less arduous with a little help. "Maybe there's something you can do. Not for me, but maybe for my children." Edward nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Underscore anything," he stressed. "Perhaps a fund for their education. Something that can guarantee a better future than I can offer on my own." "Consider it done," Edward replied quickly, taking out a business card and jotting something down on the back before handing it to Livia. "Contact me after your shift. We'll organize it. It's the least I can do." Livia accepted the card, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief filling her heart. Edward's Mercedes was then gone. While she still couldn't quite understand what it was, but she felt a surge of hope that she hadn't felt for a long time. After saying goodbye to Edouard, Livia continued her working day, but her mind was elsewhere. Edouard's unexpected generosity and his reunion with his lost brother sparked a chain of thoughts about connections, family, and destiny. Livia's life, always marked by struggle and loss, suddenly seemed to be taking a new direction, one that might offer her and her children a chance of something better. I often started to laugh, thinking that this wasn't just someone's sick joke, doubting a little about human generosity. In 2015, when Livia and Mason got married, with plans to start a family, they didn't expect everything that was to come. It was a marriage marked by calm and companionship. They had their first 2 children and were now waiting for their third, until Mason's fateful and unexpected accident, which led to his instant death. While working on the construction of a building in the center of the city, due to a mechanical fault, he plummeted more than 10 stories. It was a terrible death, and Livia, at that moment at home, when she received the news, thought she was going to lose the baby. She felt dizzy and had severe abdominal pain. Perhaps not a reaction from her body, but from the body of her son, who felt the loss of the father he would never know. It had been a terrible few weeks, with her grief spiraling out of control, her pregnancy preventing her from mothering her other 2 disconsolate children. Worrying about the house, the bills, her whole world had suddenly collapsed, and the company was fighting in court for all the rights that Mason should receive. As she drove through the busy streets of Newport, Livia thought of her own children, Tomas and Clara, remembering how they had faced their father's death with a resilience that surprised her every day. She wanted to protect them from further adversity, to ensure that they would have opportunities that she and her late husband never had. The possibility of creating an educational fund for them, thanks to Edouard's support, seemed like a miracle. One of those stories you hear about but never expect to live. At the end of the day, exhausted but excited, Livia stopped her cab in front of the small apartment where she lived with her children. As she climbed the stairs, she thought about how to tell them about the day's events. She knew that Tomas, always curious and questioning, would be fascinated by the story of the siblings' reunion, and Clara, with her sweet heart, would be happy to know that her mother had helped someone in need. Inside the house, the smiling faces of Tomas and Clara welcomed her. Livia sat with them, telling them the story of Raoul and Edouard, watching the excitement and pride grow in their eyes. Tomas, in particular, was intrigued by the idea of helping strangers. "Mom, do you think I could help people like you when I grow up?" Tomas asked, his eyes shining with admiration. "Of course, my love. Helping others is something we can all do, no matter what. And sometimes, the smallest actions can make the biggest difference," replied Livia, stroking his hair. "I want to be like you, Mom," Clara said softly, hugging Livia. It was a tender moment that reinforced Livia's determination to do everything she could to ensure that her children had a promising future. Later that night, when the children were asleep, Livia took the card Edouard had given her and typed the number into her cell phone with hesitant fingers, still a little wary of the bonanza of fate. The call was answered almost immediately. "Edouard? It's me, Livia, the cab driver." Her voice wavered a little with nervousness. "Livia, I'm glad you called. Are you ready to start planning how we can help your children?" "Yes, I'm ready. And thank you, Edouard. Really, you're very welcome. It's a joy to be able to help. Tomorrow we'll meet to discuss everything. Get ready for a new beginning." Hanging up the phone, Livia looked out of the window at the city shining under the starry night. She felt as if, for the first time in a long time, luck was on her side. The meeting with Edouard was scheduled for a quiet afternoon in a cafe near the park where the children liked to play. Livia arrived a little before the scheduled time, wearing one of her best, albeit simple, outfits, and sat down at the chosen table with a clear view of the entrance. She felt a mixture of anxiety and hope, realizing that this meeting could really change her family's future. Edouard arrived on time, wearing an elegant suit that contrasted with the casual atmosphere of the cafe. He greeted Livia with a warm smile and a firm handshake that conveyed confidence. "Livia, it's great to see you again. Are you ready to start?" Edouard asked as he sat down opposite her. "Yes, I'm a little nervous, but I'm ready," replied Livia, trying to hide her nervousness with a smile. Edouard opened a folder he had brought with him and began to explain the plan. He proposed setting up an education fund, which would be administered by a trust institution to guarantee the education of Tomas, Clara, and also their future child. He detailed how the fund would cover school expenses, books, and even extracurricular activities. "I want your children to have every opportunity to explore their potential, Livia. Education is the key to opening many doors," said Edouard, his eyes shining with a mixture of determination and generosity. Livia listened, hardly believing it was real. The idea that her children would have educational security, something she and her husband had always dreamed of but had never been able to provide, was thrilling and overwhelming. "Edouard, I can't thank you enough. This is more than I could ever have hoped for," she said, her voice laced with emotion. "Livia, your kindness to my brother is priceless. This is the least I can do," Edouard explained, sketching out a larger plan that was beginning to take shape. As they discussed the details, Livia felt a new burden of worry beginning to form. Edouard, noticing something strange in her eyes, asked, "What's wrong? Aren't you happy?" "It's not that. It's just, she stopped, stroking her belly. "He'll be born soon. Just worries. Working as a cab driver can't be easy, can it? Even more so when you're pregnant. I want to help you with this too. I really don't want to bother you anymore." "Don't say that. I'm not bothered. It's a job offer. I want you to work for me. I need a new secretary at one of my companies, responsible for my emails. It's a less stressful job. You can do it from home." Edouard scribbled some numbers on a piece of paper and handed it to her. "That's how much I'm offering you." That's more than double what I earn." Olivia commented in amazement. "Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes. Yes, of course." Smiled Livia. "Great. Tomorrow I'll need you to go to one of our local offices, talk to James. He'll do a little training with you before you can start." Edouard undertook to closely monitor the fund's progress and ensure that everything was set up correctly. They exchanged phone numbers and emails to keep in continuous contact. After the meeting, as she walked home, Livia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced for a long time. When she arrived, she found Tomas and Clara playing in the bedroom, and when she looked at them, she couldn't help but cry with joy. Knowing that she could guarantee something better for them, she felt strengthened and more determined than ever. "Children, come here. I have some great news to tell you," Livia called out, a smile lighting up her face. Tomas and Clara ran up to her, curious. Livia knelt down, hugged them both, and began to explain what would happen, promising them a future full of possibilities. That day marked the beginning of a new journey for Livia and her children, full of hope and new opportunities. Her kindness and compassion towards a stranger on a rainy night had unexpectedly opened up a bright path for her own children's future, showing that kindness is transformative. Little Ethan was born 2 months later, and he was healthy. With all her hard work, Livia soon stood out in the company and gradually climbed higher and higher, managing to prosper with her family, even when raising 3 children. Tomas and Clara grew up strong and smart, and a few years later they went to university. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.